Again, we'd like to turn to Song of Solomon, chapter 8. Again, we'll read the question of verse 5. Who is this that cometh up from the wilderness, leaning upon her beloved? Again, it's a question asked by the daughters of Jerusalem concerning the woman of the Song of Solomon. And as we've already said, the question is more of expression of wonder, expression of astonishment, than it is information. The question reveals that she was viewed by these daughters of Jerusalem as strange, beyond the usual, beyond the norm. From the question, we see the direction of the woman. She cometh up from the wilderness. And again, this is present tense, something that she is doing. She's ascending. She's rising above the wilderness. That needs to be descriptive of us as individuals, needs to be descriptive of us as a church. So we see this woman. She's noticeably different in her character, in her direction, in her life. In this message, we want to notice some things about her that made her different and that also enabled her to rise above the wilderness. So our subject this afternoon is how to have a life coming out of the wilderness. Again, who is this that cometh up from the wilderness, leaning upon her beloved? The first thing we want to notice about her is the love of her life. It's described in the question as her beloved. Her beloved. Again, this woman is distinct from the wilderness. Her direction of life is astonishing. And I believe the foundation, the root of her distinctness and the direction of her life is seen in those words, her beloved. Her beloved. She constantly refers to him as such throughout Song of Solomon. In chapter 1, verse 7, she says, O thou whom my soul loveth. Whom my soul loveth. In chapter 1, verse 13, she refers to him as her well-beloved. 23 times she refers to him as my beloved. 3 times as my love. So we hear her say, O thou whom my soul loveth, my well-beloved, my beloved, my love. Those words speak of something that was very, very real to her. If we're going to be rising above the wilderness of this world, our love for Him must be real. It can't just be words. It must be real. O thou whom my soul loveth, my well-beloved, my beloved, my love. Those are not shallow or empty words. There's a depth in those words. It is a love that consumed her heart, consumed her mind, consumed her life. Let's just be honest. Many who profess to be God's people, they have a love for the wilderness that consumes their heart, their mind, and their life. We need a love for the Lord that consumes our heart, our mind, and our life if we're going to rise above the wilderness of the world. Our love for Him must be deep. O Thou whom my soul loveth. Deep enough to reach the soul, the inner depths of our being. Again, O Thou whom my soul loveth, my well-beloved, my beloved, my love. You'll notice in those expressions that there is not a hint of uncertainty about them. She knew that she loved Him. There was no uncertainty whatsoever. Her love was certain. There was no question. There was no doubt concerning her love for Him. And if we're going to be rising above the wilderness of this world, our love for Him must be absolutely certain. No doubt whatsoever. As you again read those words, O Thou whom my soul loveth, my well-beloved, my beloved, my love. There's emotion in those words. Her love for Him did not leave her emotionally detached from Him. A lot of people who profess love for the Lord, but they're emotionally detached from the Lord. That's not love. That's not love. It was an emotion-filled love, not just the love of words. So again, if we're going to rise above the wilderness of this world, our love for Him must consume our heart, our mind, our life. Her love for Him also was in terms of personal relationship and experience. Notice chapter 1, verse 14. Notice her experience of Him. And again, it's a loving experience. Verse 14, my beloved is unto me as. And then she goes on. But there's an experience there. Chapter 2, verse 8. The voice of my beloved, behold, He cometh. Again, she's experiencing Him. Verse 10. My beloved spake and said unto me, and said unto me, rise up, my love, my fair one, come away. Verse 16, my beloved is mine, and I am His. Again, there's personal experience. Chapter 5, verse 2, I sleep, but my heart waketh. It is the voice of my beloved that knocketh, saying, open to me. Again, an experience of His person. Verse 4, my beloved put in his hand by the hole of the door. And then notice chapter 6, verse 3. I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. In chapter 7, verse 10, I am my beloved's, and His desire is toward me. His desire is toward me. So if we're going to be rising above the wilderness of this world, our love for Him must involve personal relationship with Him. Personal relationship with Him. Her love for Him was fervent. Her love for Him was intense. And if we're going to be rising above the world, the love must be fervent. It must be intense. When she spake those words, my well-beloved, whom my soul loveth, etc., she was stating her priority in life. He's her priority. And you want to know why people do not rise above the wilderness? Is because their priorities are wrong. The priorities are all wrong, all out of order. But when she said, "Of whom my soul loveth, my well-beloved, my beloved, my love," was a love that exceeded all others. There's no comparison in any other love of her life to this. He was the center of her interest. He was the focal point of her life. He was the meaning of her life. And therefore her motives, her purposes, her viewpoints, her goals, her desires, her pursuits were all defined by her love for Him. And if we're going to be rising above the wilderness of this world, our love for Him must be the priority in our life. And if it's not, you're going to go further into the wilderness. Now, it would be quite a stretch for anyone to even imagine, as you look at Christianity today, that it is coming up out of the world. No, that's not what I see. It's going further and further down into the world. And the foundation, the reason is a lack of this foundation, a lack of love for the Lord. It was a love that identified her with Him. That's what love does. She's identified with Him. She says in chapter 2, verse 16, "My beloved is mine and I am His." That's her identity. There's a link between them. There's a bond. There's an attachment. My beloved is mine and I am His. There's a togetherness. There's a common ground. There's an agreement. And if we're going to be rising above the wilderness of the world, we need a love that is identified with Him. Also, her love for Him was public. In chapter 3 and verse 3, she said to the watchman, "Saw ye Him whom my soul loveth?" And in chapter 5 and verse 8, she said to the daughters of Jerusalem, "If ye find my beloved." And we see the same thing, chapter 2 verse 7, chapter 3 verse 5, chapter 8 verse 4. She declares publicly her love for the Lord. She was unashamed. She was uninhibited to declare her love for Him to others. It was a love that was openly manifested. No shame whatsoever. And yet there are many of God's people today who seem to be ashamed of the Lord. There should be no shame. We should openly declare our love for the Lord. Our love for Him should be the testimony of our life. This is all necessary if we're going to be coming up out of the wilderness. Her love to Him was one of friendship. He was her friend. She said in chapter 5, verse 16, "This is my beloved. This is my friend. This is my beloved. This is my friend." A friend of the closest kind. And if we're going to come up from the wilderness, if we're going to be rising continually from the wilderness, our love for Him must make Him our closest friend. If your closest friend is in the wilderness, part of the wilderness, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. Your closest friend needs to be the Lord. He's far superior to the wilderness. Her love for Him made Him the desire of her life. She was persuaded that He was the best, that the wilderness had nothing to offer better than Him. He's the best. And yet there are so many of God's people who seem to be scared to death that they're going to miss out on something in the wilderness. You need to have the conviction that He is the best. The world has nothing else to offer. Chapter 2, verse 3, she says, as the apple tree among the trees of the wood, so is my beloved among the sons. In other words, He's the best. He's the best. And in chapter 5, verse 9, the daughters of Jerusalem asked her, what is thy beloved more than another? You act like your beloved is more special than anyone else's. He is. What is thy beloved more than another? And then she proceeds to give a description of him. And her description of him only shows how well she knew him and the personal relationship that she had with him. And she went on to say, He's the chiefest among 10,000. In other words, He's the best. He's the best. And I love Him. So there's nothing, when you have that kind of love, you're not going to be pulled into the wilderness. So we need a love for Him that we are absolutely persuaded He's the best. There's no need for me to go searching in the wilderness for something better. There is nothing better. There is nothing. So He's the love of her life. Is a love stronger than all the pullings of the wilderness? A love stronger than all the allurements of the wilderness. Secondly, reason that she was able to rise above, she walked with Him. She walked with Him in the wilderness. Who is this that cometh up from the wilderness leaning upon her beloved? Well, it doesn't say that they're walking together. If she can lean upon Him, He's close enough for her to do so. Therefore, they are walking together. What does that mean? That means they are in accordance with one another. She's in accordance with Him. She's in agreement with Him. And if we're going to be rising above the wilderness of this world, there must be an agreement. We must be in agreement with Christ. Again, let's be honest. The reason many of God's people are sinking further and further into the wilderness, rather than coming up out of the wilderness, is because they're more in agreement with the wilderness than they are in the Lord. They're in disagreement with the Lord. And if you don't agree with the Lord, you're going to go further into the wilderness. She's walking with Him. That's fellowship with Him. That is, they're moving in the same direction. We have to live in this wilderness. But as we do so, we're to move in the same direction as the Lord. And if you move in the same direction as the Lord, you will be coming up out of the wilderness, not going further down into the wilderness. He's escorting her, really. He's escorting her up from the wilderness. Jesus says to us over and over in the Gospels, follow me, follow me. And as we follow Him, as we walk with Him, we are escorted out of the wilderness. Notice her posture. Who is this that cometh up from the wilderness leaning upon her beloved? Now that implies several truths that are necessary for us to be continually ascending up from the wilderness. She's leaning upon her beloved. That means that He is reality in her life. You cannot lean on that which is not real. Try it sometime. You'll fall. You'll fall. It has to be real if you're going to lean. He's a reality to her. I'm afraid many times the Lord's just part of the imagination instead of a reality. And throughout the book, she mentions His mouth, His voice, His chambers, His table, His shadow, His banner. She mentions His left hand. She mentions His right hand, His bed, His thigh, His heart, His head, His locks, His eyes, His cheeks, His lips, His legs, His countenance, His garden, His desire. All of that states He was a reality in her life. She had a personal knowledge of Him. She had a personal experience of Him. And if we're going to be rising above the wilderness, He's got to be more than a point of doctrine. He's got to be more. Again, see her. She's leaning upon her beloved. There's an awareness of His presence. There's an awareness of His presence. And if we're going to be rising above the wilderness of this world, we need to be aware of His presence. The fact that she leaned upon Him means that she was conscious of her need to lean. She was conscious of her own weakness. But she was also keenly aware of His strength. He was strong enough to bear her weight. She leaned upon Him. Before you lean upon something, you usually make sure that it's strong enough to bear your weight. And she knew. She was aware of His strength. Leaning upon her beloved is a position of confidence. He's able to hold me up. It's a declaration of dependence upon Him. Why is she leaning upon her beloved? She knows that the journey is long. She knows that the journey is perilous. And she knows that she is weak and she is unable on her own. So she leans upon Him. You'll never come up out of the wilderness on your own strength. It will not happen. You have to lean. You have to lean upon Him. As she's leaning upon Him, in reality, she is strengthening herself in Him. She's becoming stronger. She's experiencing His maintaining, sustaining, keeping power. She's experiencing His help. She's leaning upon her beloved. And if we're going to rise above the wilderness of this world, that must be so. We must lean. It also implies that she's near to Him. She's close to Him. Again, you can't lean on that lamppost out there. Not from here you can't. You've got to get closer. You got to get close to what you're leaning upon. And the fact that she's leaning upon Him means that she is close. She is near to Him. She's cast herself upon Him. She's leaning her weight upon Him. She is joined to Him. She has been drawn to Him. She's leaning upon her beloved. What are we drawn to? Are we drawn to the wilderness? Or are we drawn to Him? Well, that'll depend upon what is the love of our life. She's sensitive to Him. She's committed to Him. She's surrendered to Him. She's controlled and dominated by Him. She's leaning. He's everything. If we're going to be rising above the wilderness of this world, this must be so. There's no other way. She's leaning, present tense, continuous. He has a continuous impact upon her life. The very moment the Lord is not an impact in your life, you need to get right. You need to get right. Don't go any further. Don't take another step. Get right. He is a continuous impact upon her life. Who is this that cometh up from the wilderness, leaning upon her beloved? Again, that's indicative that He is a reality in her life. She is aware of His presence. She is conscious of her own weakness. And she is aware of His strength. And she is confident and she is dependent upon Him. And she is strengthening herself in Him. And she is close to Him. And this regardless of the time, the condition, the place, the circumstance. These are all so. But in closing, the question is asked, who is this that cometh up from the wilderness leaning upon her beloved? They noticed that she was different. They noticed that she was ascending. The world needs to notice that we're different. The world needs to notice that we are ascending. And the world needs to, they noticed her confidence and dependence upon Him. And the world needs to notice that of us as well. And they noticed her love for Him. And the world needs to notice that as well. But they noticed, most importantly, when they saw her, they noticed Him. That's what's most important. Who is this that cometh up from the wilderness leaning upon her beloved? When they saw her, they saw Him. That's a testimony. That's the testimony she had. That should be the testimony that we desire. When people look at us, that they would see Christ. Although they may not like what they see, but they see Christ. They see Christ. And if that is so, of each individual member of this church, then it'll be so of the church. It can't be so of the church if it's not so of the individual members of the church. We do not have to live our lives chained to the wilderness. If you do, that's your own fault. We do not have to live our lives defined by the waste and the dysfunction and the ruin that is all around us. There is a way to rise above it all. And it's what we see here in our text. We do not have to live life discouraged by the wilderness. We don't have to live life sinking into the wilderness further and further. We can be coming up from the wilderness. But we must make sure that our delight, our desire, our passion, our zeal is not wilderness bound. Because if that is so, you're going to go further and further and further into the wilderness. But our desire and our longing and our passion and our zeal are to be bound in Him. And if that is so, we will become, we'll talk about how hard it is nowadays. That's not to be the emphasis. That's not to be the focal point. That's focusing on the wilderness. That's a wrong focal point. It's not even to be our chief concern. Oh, what do you think is going to happen? Oh, this is horrible. Our concern is, am I coming up out of it? That's our concern. Well, what's going to happen? Don't worry about it. It's not your concern. Your responsibility is to come up out of the wilderness. But to fret about it, I guarantee you, you go further down into it. You just sink further and further into the wilderness. And you sit in front of a TV all day long and watch news, so-called. You're going to sink further and further in the wilderness. That's not going to bring you out of the wilderness. Get in the book. Study the Word. Get your focus on Him. That's our responsibility. It's not my responsibility to fix the politics of the world. That's not what I'm here for. It's our responsibility to just live for the Lord. To do all for His honor. To do all for His glory. Oh, may we be a people that are coming up out of the wilderness. Brother Dave, if you'll come and lead us in a verse of song.